That's Karen Henderson standing in my cornfield in a $1,000 wedding dress right before I dumped 500 gallons of liquefied cow manure on her and 300 of her closest friends. How'd we get here? Well, when the HOA decided my farm was the perfect spot for their unauthorized community wedding, I decided it was the perfect spot for my regularly scheduled fertilizer drop, and I wasn't about to reschedule. I always said there were two kinds of people in this world: the ones who mind their own business and the ones who think the whole world is theirs to manage. Before Karen showed up, I lived a simple life, a good life. I ran a modest crop farm on the outskirts of a sleepy rural town nestled right against the last patch of real wildland this side of the county. My days started before the sun rose and ended long after it dipped below the fields, usually with dirt under my fingernails and the satisfied ache of a day's work well spent. I had a battered but beloved old crop duster, a 1967 Grumman egg cat that I'd inherited from my uncle. Every season, I'd scheduled 2 fertilizer runs over my fields, one in early spring, one right after midsummer. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. I'd load up the tanks with a pungent brew designed to give the crops a boost and take to the skies, buzzing low over my land like a hawk surveying its territory. It was a ritual almost as old as the farm itself. For years, nobody cared. For years, nobody bothered me, until Karen moved in. Karen Henderson, newly elected president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, rolled into town like a hurricane in a minivan. She wasn't just some nosy neighbor. She was a force of nature wrapped in pastel cardigans, armed with clipboards, newsletters, and a pathological obsession with community events. Word spread fast that she was holding HOA meetings twice a week, organizing volunteer landscaping crews to repaint mailboxes, and handing out citations like they were free samples at the county fair. Her house was the first to get a professionally manicured lawn so symmetrical it looked like it had been drawn with a protractor. Next came the community welcome center she built out of her own garage, complete with a mural of smiling cartoon houses and stick figure children holding balloons. At first, it was all contained to Willow Creek. I figured if folks wanted to live like prisoners in their own pastel-painted Steepford utopia, that was their business. But Karen's ambitions didn't stop at her picket fence. No, sir. Pretty soon, she started leading what she called nature walks, guided tours through the open fields that unfortunately included my property. I found the first group on a Saturday morning, a line of yoga pants wearing suburbanites carrying iced coffees and pointing at my soybean rows like they were at some kind of botanical garden. Karen was right at the front, big straw hat perched on her blonde head, waving her clipboard like a baton. When I confronted her, polite at first, I'm no savage, she gave me a blinding fake smile and said, "Oh, we're just appreciating the beauty of our shared spaces." I corrected her firmly. This wasn't a shared space. This was my land, privately owned, taxes paid up, no easements, no rights of way. She nodded like she was listening, and then handed me a pamphlet on stewardship of community greenbelts. That was when the violation notices started appearing, little neon slips folded neatly into my mailbox, citing me for everything from unauthorized land maintenance to unsightly agricultural practices, whatever that was supposed to mean. I laughed the first time, crumpled the second. By the third, I started saving them in a shoebox, knowing deep down that things were about to get worse. Karen filed complaints with the county about my fertilizer runs, claiming the odor was a public nuisance. She put up hand-painted signs along the dirt road leading to my farm that read, "Please respect community property," with a little HOA logo at the bottom. She posted photos of my tractor on the Willow Creek HOA Facebook page, tagging them with captions like "local eyesore" or "town tradition you decide." Every week brought some new insult, some new act of passive-aggressive warfare. And I kept doing what I always did, tending my fields, minding my business, flying my little plane, and thinking that if I just ignored her long enough, she'd lose interest. But Karen wasn't the type to lose interest. No, Karen was the type to escalate. By midsummer, the rumor started. Karen was going door to door in Willow Creek, clipboard in hand, talking about a historic easement that allegedly granted the community shared use of my fields. She said the farm was originally intended as a communal green space when the development was first platted, which was a bold claim considering my family had owned this land since 194, a full 80 years before Willow Creek Estates was a gleam in some developer. Karen wasn't letting facts get in her way. She circulated petitions. She gathered signatures. She printed up glossy flyers with a photoshopped picture of my fields transformed into a Community arboretum and event garden in her fantasy. There were pergolas and fountains and jogging trails where my wheat currently grew. I found one of her flyers stuffed under my windshield wiper at the gas station. Imagine the possibilities, it chirped in bubble letters above a cartoonish drawing of my barn converted into a wedding venue. She even held a town hall meeting at the Willow Creek Clubhouse, where she presented her case to a room full of bored, restless suburbanites desperate for something to care about. This land belongs to all of us, she said, voice trembling with full passion. It's time to reclaim our community's heart. She talked about reconnecting to nature, about celebrating rural heritage, about building a sustainable future together. Not once did she mention the fact that she didn't own a square inch of my farm. When one of the few sensible voices in the room, old Mr. FIC and Surdy Axon, scanned the room, Harmon, who'd grown up in this town, stood up and said, "Ain't that Jenkins' land? Always has been." Karen just smiled tightly and said, "That's a complicated legal issue we're working to clarify." Clarify, like somehow my deed, the one filed with the county clerk and stamped on triplicate, was up for interpretation. That night, I sat on my porch, a bottle of cheap beer, sweating in my hand, staring out at my fields under the silver light of the moon. I thought about my grandfather planting the first rows here by hand, about my father flying the first fertilizer run in the same plane I now piloted. I thought about the hours I'd spent fixing that old plane, painting it barn red, feeling like I was stitching time itself back together with every bolt tightened. This land wasn't just dirt to me. It was blood and sweat and stories and bones. It was memory. It was home. And Karen Henderson, HOA Queen, clipboard warrior, self-appointed steward of all things beautiful, thought she could take it from me with a petition and a fake easement claim. That's when I realized something deep in my gut, something cold and certain. Karen wasn't going to stop, not until she was made to. Not until she learned the hard way that some people don't just roll over when you wave a clipboard at them. Some people fight back. I set down my beer, pulled out my planner, and flipped to the upcoming Saturday, the day I'd scheduled my annual midsummer fertilization flyover. My pen hovered over the date for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, I circled it twice. The first time I caught them, it was a Sunday morning, just after dawn, when the light was still soft and everything smelled like wet soil and honeysuckle. I was out by the back fence, checking the irrigation lines, when I spotted movement out in the east field. At first, I thought it might be deer, not uncommon that time of year. But when I squinted against the sunrise, what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't deer, it was people, a lot of people, maybe 24 of them, spread out across my soybean rows, unrolling yoga mats and laying down picnic blankets like they owned the place. I stood there frozen, a wrench dangling from my hand, as a woman in neon leggings led a group of middle-aged suburbanites through what appeared to be a very spirited session of sun salutation. At the head of it all, of course, stood Karen Henderson herself, clipboard tucked under one arm, beaming like a queen surveying her kingdom. I marched down the dirt path toward them, boots kicking up little puffs of dust, heart hammering in my chest. Karen spotted me when I was about 20 feet away and had the audacity to wave like we were old friends. "Good morning," she chirped. "Isn't it a beautiful day to center ourselves in nature?" I stopped dead in front of her, crossing my arms over my chest. "Karen," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "what the hell do you think you're doing on my land?" She blinked at me, all innocent blue eyes and Botox. "Oh, I'm sorry, didn't you see the announcement? This is part of our new community wellness initiative, Suinri. SE yoga and meditation in the heart of Willow Creek." She gestured expansively at my field, as if I should be honored by the invasion. I stared at her, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "This isn't Willow Creek. This is my private farm. You have no right to be here." Karen's smile tightened just slightly at the edges. "Well, technically, that's still under discussion. We're working with the county to clarify the easement boundaries." That was a lie. There was no easement. There had never been an easement. But Karen had figured out something about people say a thing confidently enough, rapid in just enough bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, and most folks will nod along and accept it. Not me. I pointed back toward the dirt road. "Get off my land." Karen gave a little theatrical sigh, like I was a difficult child. "All right, everyone, let's relocate to the community welcome center," she called out, clapping her hands. The yoga group grumbled, rolling up their mats and shuffling back toward the road, throwing me dirty looks like I was the one ruining their morning. As they left, I noticed something new: small wooden stakes hammered into the ground at regular intervals along the edge of my field, each one topped with a bright orange flag that read, "Future Willow Creek Community Gardens." My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. I yanked one of the stakes out of the ground and snapped it over my knee. Karen watched me do it, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled again, cool and bright as a winter sunrise. Change is hard for some people, she said sweetly, and walked away. That night, I drove the perimeter of my property with a spotlight mounted to the roof of my old Ford. Everywhere I looked, I found more signs, cheap laminated ones zip tied to my fences and gates. Coming soon, community picnic area, future site of the Willow Creek Butterfly Garden, proposed pavilion and family fun zone. It was like a virus, spreading faster than I could tear it down. I spent 2 hours ripping down every last one, muttering curses under my breath, throwing the shredded remains into the bed of my truck. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found a fresh copy of the Willow Creek Estates HOA newsletter right there on the front page. Under a full-color photo of my own damn barn was a headline that read, "Exciting changes ahead, introducing the heart of Willow Creek, our new community green space." The article went on to gush about how the HOA was in discussions to reclaim and repurpose the farm fields for public enrichment, painting a picture of walking trails, rose gardens, farmers markets, and open-air concerts, all happening on land they didn't own, didn't lease, and had no legal claim to whatsoever. My hands shook as I crumpled the paper, veins pounding at my temples. It wasn't just petty anymore. It wasn't just trespassing. They were rewriting reality, gaslighting the entire community into believing that my home, my livelihood, was already theirs. And Karen's sweet, smiling, clipboard-wielding Karen was leading the charge. I decided enough was enough. I called up my lawyer, Joe Hardy, a crusty old bulldog who'd spent 40 years suing everyone from crooked contractors to corrupt school boards. Joe wasn't fancy, but he was mean, and he knew how to write a cease and desist letter that could peel paint off a wall within 24 hours. He had a stack of legal documents drafted and mailed to the Willow Creek HOA, explicitly outlining the trespasses, the false claims, the unauthorized signage by the false claims, the unauthorized signage, and the damage to my property. We included copies of my deed, satellite images from the county assessor's office, and even a notarized affidavit from the previous land surveyor confirming that no public easements existed. I thought foolishly that would be the end of it, but Karen, bless her sociopathic little heart, had other ideas. The very next Saturday, I woke up to the sound of cars, lots of cars crunching down the dirt road toward my farm. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my hat, and went outside, just in time to see a caravan of minivans, SUVs, and even a couple of tour buses rolling to a stop along the edge of my fields. Out poured families in matching t-shirts that read, "Willow Creek Community Garden Kickoff Day." Kids clutched baskets for picking produce. Adults carried folding chairs and coolers. Someone was setting up a bouncy house. I stood there, stunned, mouth hanging open, as Karen, dressed in a khaki vest and sun hat like some kind of budget safari guide, clambered onto the tailgate of a pickup truck and lifted a megaphone to her mouth. "Welcome everyone to our first official community garden tour," she bellowed, the sound echoing off the hills. "This is a historic day for Willow Creek as we reclaim our shared heritage and build a greener future together." The crowd cheered. Karen spotted me standing there, red-faced and shaking, and had the audacity to wave again like we were old friends. I didn't even bother yelling. I stormed back into my house, grabbed the folder of legal documents Joe had prepared, and marched straight over to where Karen was handing out garden maps to eager families. I slapped the paperwork into her hands hard enough to make the megaphone wobble. "You are trespassing," I said, voice low and deadly calm. "You are illegally organizing events on private property. You have been officially warned. If you do not vacate immediately, I will call the sheriff, file criminal charges, and sue the HOA for every penny it has, and then some." For the first time, Karen's smile faltered only for a second. Then she recovered, pasted on that Stepford wife grin, and said into the megaphone, "All right, everyone, slight change of plans. Let's relocate to the clubhouse for our garden activities." The crowd booed and grumbled, but eventually started packing up their gear. As they shuffled past me, I caught snippets of conversation, complaints about that stubborn farmer, jokes about how they should just bulldoze it, already mutters about how the community deserves better. I stood there, heart-pounding, fists clenched at my sides, watching them retreat like a flood draining back into the sewer where it belonged. And deep down in the pit of my gut, I knew something ugly and inevitable. They weren't giving up. Karen wasn't giving up, they declared war. The email came in at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning, right as I was sitting down with my first cup of coffee. I didn't recognize the sender at first. Some fancy events company with a name like Willow Vine Weddings. I almost Deleted it figuring it was more spam about floral arrangements or country club memberships I didn't want, but something in the subject line stopped me cold. Updated catering timeline for Henderson Wedding Jenkins property venue. My stomach dropped into my boots. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. There in painstaking detail was a full timeline for a wedding scheduled 3 Saturdays from now, right smack in the middle of my busiest planting season, and the location listed was my land, specifically the south field perimeter. Lined with white chairs, altar arch installed facing sunset, reception tent 40-60 feet placed adjacent to the east, cornrows, portable restroom, delivery Friday night. I read it twice, my hands getting sweatier with each pass. It wasn't just a casual gathering. It was a full-blown wedding ceremony and reception for 300 guests, caterers, photographers, DJs, generators, lighting towers, floral trucks, restroom, trailers, even golf carts rented to shuttle guests from the gravel road to the field. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing on my laptop screen like some cruel cosmic joke. I stared out the window at my fields, my neatly tilled rows, the very lifeblood of my farm, and imagined hundreds of strangers stomping through it in stilettos and dress shoes, spilling champagne and grinding the young shoots in a muddy pulp. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my gut. I grabbed my wall calendar, the one tacked above my kitchen sink, and thumbed through the pages to May. There, it was already circled in black sharp. May 14th, 9:00 a.m. scheduled fertilizer flyover. North and south fields. It wasn't just the same weekend, it was the same day, the same time. I sat there for a long moment, heart pounding in my ears, staring at the perfect collision course fate had laid out in front of me. I could almost hear the engines of my crop duster purring in the background, feel the weight of the fertilizer tanks, sloshing smell, the heady ripe stink of the mixture I had pre-ordered for extra potency this year. I opened my email again and scanned the timeline. Ceremony, start time 1 a.m. cocktail hour 110 a.m. reception tent open noon. It was almost poetic, but first I had to be sure I couldn't just show up and ruin someone's wedding without knowing all the facts. I drove straight into town and stormed into the Willow Creek Estates HOA office, where the walls were plastered with motivational posters about community spirit and shared prosperity. Karen was behind the reception desk, chattering brightly into a headset by PLE of ball, but when she saw me coming, her smile froze halfway up her face. "Mr. Jenkins," she chirped, pulling off the headset. "What a surprise. What can I do for you today?" I slapped the printed catering email down on the counter between us. "You can explain this," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Karen blinked, recovered, and picked up the paper delicately like it might be contaminated. She skimmed it, her face smoothing into that infuriating mask of benign condescension she wore like armor. "Oh, this," she said lightly. "Yes, the Henderson wedding. Isn't it exciting? It's going to be a beautiful event for the whole community on my land," I said flatly. Without my permission, Karen set the paper down and folded her hands primly. "Well, technically the HOA has authorized temporary community use of the field. Given the ongoing discussions about its status as a future green space, we felt it appropriate to allow a special event that celebrates our shared values." My fists clenched at my sides. "You have no authority to authorize anything. That land is privately owned. You know that. You've seen the deed." Karen smiled tightened. "There's some ambiguity about that. Actually, our legal team is looking into the historical use of the property and the implied community rights. In the meantime, we didn't want to delay the celebration. After all, love waits for no one." She gave a little tinkling laugh like bells ringing in hell. I stared at her, feeling my pulse hammering against my skull. "You are trespassing," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Every truck, every tent, every porta-potty you put on that field is an act of trespass. You're lucky I don't call the sheriff right now." Karen sighed like I was a particularly slow student she had been forced to tutor. "Mr. Jenkins, this community thrives on goodwill and flexibility. If you choose to be difficult about this, well, that's your choice. But just know that the entire town will see who's really standing in the way of progress and happiness." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into something almost pitying. "Do you really want to be the man who ruined a young couple's wedding day?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out, not because I didn't have any, but because in that moment a plan was already crystallizing in the back of my mind. I didn't slam my fists down, I didn't shout. I simply picked up the email, folded it neatly back into my pocket, and turned to walk out, my boots heavy on the cheap tile floor. Behind me, Karen's voice floated after me, syrupy sweet. "We'd still love to have you attend, Mr. Jenkins' community is about inclusion. After all, I drove back to the farm. In a fog, the rage simmering low and steady inside me like coals banked for a fire. I parked my truck by the barn, climbed up into the loft, where I kept my old maps and maintenance logs, and checked every note, every calendar entry, every invoice for my fertilizer order. It was all set in stone. The supplier was delivering the load on Friday. The tanks would be filled Saturday morning. My flyover window, coordinated weeks in advance with the tiny municipal airstrip I used, was locked in for 90 a.m. sharp, and nowhere in any of my plans was there an allowance for 300 people trespassing on my land, trampling my future crops into confetti, and treating my home like their personal amusement park. I climbed back down, went into the house, and sat at the kitchen table with my old flight manual spread out before me. Page after page of checklists, safety procedures, emergency maneuvers. I found the section on payload drops. Underlined in red, ensure dispersal areas are clear of personnel to prevent injury. I stared at that line for a long time, then I got up, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat back down, smiling slowly as the plan wrote itself across my mind. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. No, Karen had made it very clear that any attempt to cancel would be spun against me in the court of public opinion. I wasn't going to call the sheriff. That would take too long, and by the time the bureaucrats finished squabbling about easements and permissions, the damage to my field would be done. No, I was going to let them have their day every pastel draped rose-plaid Instagram filtered minute of it. And when the moment came, when Karen stood under her white satin archway, smiling her smug victory smile, surrounded by 300 uninvited guests on my land, I was going to fertilize them from the sky. Saturday morning dawned hot, and still the kind of heavy shimmering heat that makes the horizon look like it's breathing. I was up before first light, standing in the shadow of my old Grumman cat, its red paint faded but proud, its engine ticking quietly as I finished my final checks. The fertilizer was loaded, a special custom blend I'd ordered just for the foul fields, extra rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, with a hearty dose of liquefied cow manure to really make the mixture. The supplier had even thrown in a little something extra, a sludge they normally used for orchard ground rejuvenation, the kind that soaked deep into the soil, and anything else it touched with a smell you could taste on the back of your tongue for days. I did one last walk around of the plane, running my hand over the battered fuselage, checking the dispersal tanks, tapping each rivet, and seemed like a priest blessing a battle flag. I could feel it building inside me, a calm, righteous certainty that I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about principle, about drawing a line in the dirt, or in this case, across the sky. By the time I climbed into the cockpit and strapped myself in, the first cars were already pulling up along the dirt road. I watched through the dusty windshield as a parade of luxury SUVs, glossy rental vans, and vintage convertibles crawled onto my land like an invasion force. Karen had gone all out. She'd rented white wooden chairs, a full-size portable dance floor, 3 massive event tents, a mobile bar truck, and even one of those ridiculous flower walls where guests could pose for pictures holding hand-lettered signs that said things like "Love wins" and "Forever starts here." When you read this story, you might laugh, or you might think the farmer was a legend for responding in such an unforgettable way. But behind the dark humor lies a serious lesson about boundaries, ownership, and respect. 1. Respect boundaries, both literal and figurative. Nothing is public property if you don't have permission. No one has the right to take someone else's land, assets, or labor and call it for the community. No matter how noble your goal is, if your method is wrong, it's still wrong. 2. Not everyone is gentle, and no one stays silent forever. The farmer in this story tolerated too much for too long. But even the quietest people have their limits. Remember, someone's patience is not something for you to exploit. 3. The law is a weapon, but pride cuts deeper. Yes, the farmer had a lawyer and documents. But in the end, what pushed him to act wasn't just legal violation. It was a matter of pride, of family legacy, of tradition, and of standing up for his home. 4. Don't become a Karen in any community. Loving your community is great, but when you start forcing your personal vision on others, ignoring consent, and disrespecting ownership, you stop being a builder. You become an invader. 5. Humor may make us laugh, but the truth deserves reflection. Sure, it's funny to imagine 300 wedding guests getting sprayed with cow manure from the sky, but ask yourself, if it were you, How would you respond? Through legal means? Public campaigns? Or would you plan the most epic fertilizer drop in rural history?